Most businesses don't have a revenue problem. They have a revenue proximity problem. If an expense doesn't clearly connect to revenue, it becomes optional. Optional gets cut, even when it protects stability, even when it safeguards cash flow, even when it prevents future contraction. Profitability does not guarantee durability. Revenue does not guarantee liquidity. And in periods of pressure, leaders don't cut what is unnecessary. They cut what feels distant from revenue. That distinction determines whether a company compounds or destabilizes. This impacts founders, CEOs, operators, agency owners, and growth stage companies, especially those scaling past early traction. Because once payroll expands and fixed commitments increase, liquidity discipline becomes more important than growth strategy. Growth without sequencing creates exposure. Exposure creates instability. And instability quietly erodes confidence. By the end of this video, you'll understand why anything that does not visibly touch revenue becomes vulnerable, and how disciplined cash flow control prevents that cycle. The most common reaction to revenue pressure is simple. We just need more sales. That belief feels logical. Revenue is the top-line signal of health. More sales appear to solve most problems. But sales and liquidity operate on different timelines. Revenue is recognized when the contract is signed. Cash is realized when payment clears. Commitments are made immediately. Liquidity adjusts later. That gap is where discipline matters. Founders often equate signed revenue with usable capital. They treat projected inflow as operational capacity, but revenue that has not converted is not liquidity. And commitments made against unconverted revenue introduce timing risk. The misinterpretation is subtle. Revenue performance improves. Structural obligations expand. Liquidity exposure increases. When conditions tighten, the first instinct is to cut anything that doesn't visibly drive revenue. Operations support, systems refinement, process documentation, strategic forecasting. Those functions feel indirect. But many of them protect the timing and predictability of revenue itself. When revenue proximity becomes the only filter, sequencing breaks. Now consider how pressure compounds. A strong quarter creates confidence. Confidence accelerates hiring. Marketing budgets expand. Software stacks grow. Office leases extend. Payroll scales. Each decision appears rational in isolation. Collectively, they increase fixed obligations. Then a payment delay occurs, or a quarter softens. Revenue hasn't collapsed. Liquidity shifts. Founders begin monitoring receivables more closely. Vendor payments are delayed. Expense approvals require hesitation. Payroll begins to feel heavier than expected. Nothing dramatic has happened, but timing has moved. Revenue may still look healthy. Liquidity feels unstable because commitments were made ahead of cash conversion. This is not a sales problem. It is a sequencing problem. There are three core cash flow risks operating underneath this pattern. First, revenue is not liquidity. Revenue measures performance. Liquidity measures resilience. Revenue can grow while liquidity tightens. If payment terms stretch from 30 to 45 days, the company absorbs a 15-day funding gap. Without buffer, that gap becomes pressure. Second, fixed cost sensitivity. Fixed costs reduce flexibility. Variable costs adjust. Fixed costs do not. When payroll, leases, and subscriptions increase, the margin for timing error shrinks. A small delay can trigger outsized stress. Third, decision timing exposure. Exposure occurs when structural decisions are made based on projected revenue rather than converted cash. The faster structure expands relative to cash realization, the more fragile the system becomes. Each of these risks is manageable, but only with discipline. Let's model this numerically. Assume a business generates $200,000 in monthly revenue. Payment terms are net 45 days. That means cash from January largely arrives mid-March. Operating expenses before expansion are $140,000 per month. The company holds $120,000 in available cash. Encouraged by growth, leadership adds 2 hires at $8,000 each per month, an additional $10,000 in marketing, $4,000 in new software commitments. Total new fixed obligations, $30,000 per month. Operating expenses rise to $170,000. Revenue still reports at $200,000. On paper, margins remain positive. Then 2 large clients delay payment by 20 days. $60,000 expected mid-March now arrives in early April. During that gap, payroll runs, marketing charges process, software subscriptions auto-renew. Cash outflow remains fixed. The company now faces a temporary liquidity deficit. Revenue did not collapse. Profitability did not disappear. Timing shifted. And because structure expanded ahead of cash realization, stability compressed. That compression triggers reactive cuts, often in areas that indirectly support revenue generation. Liquidity control requires structural thinking. 3 principles apply. Principle 1. Separate revenue from cash metrics. Revenue dashboards and liquidity dashboards must operate independently. Track contracted revenue. Track collected cash. Track cash runway. Do not merge them into a single number. Principle 2. Sequence commitments after cash conversion. Major structural decisions, hiring, leases, long-term subscriptions, should follow sustained cash realization, not isolated revenue spikes. This slows fragility without slowing growth. Principle 3. Stress test fixed cost expansion. Before approving new commitments, model a delay event. What happens if 20% of receivables shift 30 days? Does liquidity remain stable? If not, sequencing requires adjustment. These are not conservative tactics. They are scaling disciplines. If sequencing remains misaligned long-term, fragility compounds, credit reliance increases, decision-making becomes reactive. Founders operate under quiet stress. Strategic opportunities are missed because liquidity is constrained. Optionality declines. And optionality is what gives executives leverage. Companies rarely fail because revenue disappears overnight. They weaken because liquidity discipline erodes gradually. Revenue fuels growth. Liquidity protects survival. Anything that does not visibly touch revenue will be cut under pressure. The disciplined leader ensures that what protects liquidity is clearly connected to revenue stability before pressure arrives. If you value structured breakdowns focused on financial control and operational stability, subscribe for more strategic insights.